Boss humiliates maid in front of guest, little knowing he's a labor judge. Dorothy Wilson endured her boss's yelling with her head down, as she had done for 20 years. The coffee cup she had spilled on the documents still steamed on the desk in the luxurious penthouse office on the Upper East Side, while every insult felt like a stab to her chest, already scarred from past humiliations. "You worthless incompetent! 20 years working here and you're still as clumsy as day one," shouted Richard Blackwell, owner of one of the largest hotel chains in the country, gripping the maid's arm hard enough to leave marks. That was when Dorothy noticed the other man in the room. Young in a flawless grey suit, he observed everything with a neutral expression, but his eyes revealed something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't the first time visitors had witnessed her boss's outbursts, but there was something different about this man. "Mr. Blackwell, please," Dorothy murmured, trying to pull away. "Please what? These documents were for today's meeting." Richard tightened his grip on her arm, shaking her slightly. "Do you have any idea how much you've cost me?" The man in the grey suit took a step forward, clearing his throat softly. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwell," he said calmly but firmly. "I believe we can resolve this another way." Richard Blackwell finally let go of Dorothy's arm, as if suddenly, remembering someone else was in the room. "My apologies for the inconvenience, Judge Thompson. It's these people. I just can't find good help these days," he said, attempting a smile, though it came out more like a grimace. "Dorothy, bring us fresh coffee and then clean up this mess." Dorothy nodded and hurried to the kitchen with trembling hands. As she prepared more coffee, she caught fragments of the conversation in the office. This Judge Thompson was talking about an important case, about reviewing labor contracts for the Blackwell hotel chain. Her heart raced. She'd heard rumors about an audit of her boss's business, but she never imagined she'd be this close to it. When she returned with the tray, the atmosphere was tense. The visitor was now standing, as if about to leave. "Unfortunately, Mr. Blackwell, I believe we'll need to reschedule our meeting," he said, adjusting his tie. "What do you mean?" Richard's face flushed red again. "We've been planning this for weeks. An unexpected matter has come up," the younger man replied, and for a second his gaze met Dorothy's. "By the way, ma'am—" "Dorothy," she answered, barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Wilson, your arm is hurt." He pointed to the red marks, beginning to show where Richard had gripped her. Richard quickly interrupted. "She hit the edge of the table when she spilled the coffee. As clumsy as she is incompetent," he said with a forced laugh. "Come on, Judge, don't let a simple maid delay our business." The man in the grey suit didn't laugh. Instead, he pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to Dorothy. "My name is Michael Thompson. I'm a judge at the 5th Labor Court in New York City. If you need anything, my contact is there." A deathly silence fell over the room. Dorothy watched Richard Blackwell's face pale as she took the card with shaking fingers. "Labor judge," Richard stammered, his tone completely changed. Michael simply nodded, picking up his briefcase. "We'll reschedule our meeting about your hotel contract's compliance for another time, Mr. Blackwell. It seems you have more pressing matters to address here." When the elevator doors closed behind the judge, Dorothy knew her life was about to change forever. In her small two-room home on the outskirts of New York City, Dorothy stared at the judge's card under the dim light of her only lamp. The daughter, Jennifer, slept on the pull-out couch beside her, exhausted after yet another double shift at the hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant. The judge's words echoed in her mind. "If you need anything." Need. Dorothy. Wilson needed so many things she hardly knew where to begin. She needed to stop enduring daily humiliations. She needed to be treated with dignity after 20 years devoted to that family. She needed her basic rights, like vacations and regular hours, which she'd never had. And above all, she needed to ensure her daughter and her 5-year-old grandson, Matthew, had a better life. The boy suffered from chronic asthma, and the medications ate up a good chunk of their combined salaries. If she lost her job now— Dorothy shuddered at the thought. The phone rang, making her jump. At that hour, it could only mean trouble. "Hello?" she answered softly, careful not to wake Jennifer. "Dorothy?" Richard Blackwell's voice on the other end of the line tightened her chest. I want you here 2 hours earlier tomorrow. We need to talk about what happened today." She didn't even get a chance to respond before he hung up. The fear she felt was an old acquaintance. No matter how much she wanted justice, necessity spoke louder. With her grandson sick and bills piling up, she couldn't afford to lose that job, no matter how awful it was. That night, Dorothy barely slept. When she arrived at the Blackwells' penthouse the next morning, she found Richard already waiting, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "What did you tell him?" were his first words as soon as she walked in, not even a good morning. "Who, sir?" "The judge, Dorothy. What have you been telling him? How do you know him?" Dorothy felt her blood run cold. "I've never seen him before, sir, I swear." Richard stopped pacing and stared at her suspiciously. "Then why did he give you his card? Why was he looking at your arm like that?" "I don't know, sir," she answered truthfully. Her employer ran a hand through his graying hair, visibly stressed. "Listen carefully, Dorothy. This judge could cause me a lot of trouble. If he launches some kind of inspection into my hotels because of what he saw here yesterday, I lose millions. Do you understand that?" She simply nodded, keeping her eyes down as she always did during scoldings. "I want you to hand over that card he gave you," he said, holding out his hand expectantly. "And if he tries to contact you, you let me know immediately. Are we clear?" Dorothy hesitated. She had hidden the card at home, tucked inside the Bible she kept by her bed. "I left it at home, sir." His face turned red again. "Bring it tomorrow. Without fail." "Yes, sir. And one more thing," he added, his tone softer now. "I'm thinking of giving you a raise. How does an extra $300 a month sound?" Dorothy blinked in surprise. In 20 years, the raises she'd received could be counted on one hand, and they'd never been offered. She'd always had to beg for them. "That would be very good, sir." "Great," Richard smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Now get to work. Mrs. Victoria has guests for lunch and needs you in the kitchen." As she prepared lunch for her employer's wife and her high society friends, Dorothy couldn't shake the thought that this sudden raise came with a price: her silence. No matter how much she needed the money, something inside her rebelled. 20 years of abuse, unpaid overtime, constant humiliations. Would $300 buy all that? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, when she finally got home after 15 hours of work, she found Jennifer struggling to get Matthew to use his inhaler. "Grandma, help! Grandma!" the boy called out as soon as he saw her, slipping from his mother's arms and running toward her, his little face flushed from the effort to breathe. Dorothy Wilson scooped up her grandson, feeling his chest heave with difficulty. "Easy, my love. Grandma will help you breathe better," she said softly, taking the inhaler from her daughter's hands. With the experience of someone who had done this hundreds of times, she guided the boy to inhale the medicine properly. "The medicine ran out, Mum," Jennifer said quietly, showing her the empty bottle. "And the inhaler's almost gone too." Dorothy felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Those medications cost nearly a quarter of her paycheck. "I'll buy more tomorrow," she promised, even though she had no idea where the money would come from. Her next payment wouldn't arrive until the following week, and the water and electricity bills were already overdue. When Matthew finally fell asleep, Dorothy told her daughter about the incident with the labor judge. "Mum, this could be your chance." Jennifer took her calloused hands in hers. "You always said one day you'd have the courage to expose him." "And lose my job?" Dorothy shook her head. "Do you think at my age and with my education, I could find another job that pays the same?" "But he offered you a raise. That proves—" "He's scared," Jennifer argued. "If this judge is really interested in your case, you could at least talk to him." Dorothy fell silent, thoughtful. Despite her fear, a small flame of hope flickered in her heart. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's too risky." "Riskier than continuing to be mistreated by that man?" Jennifer pointed to her mother's arm, where the marks from Richard's fingers were still visible. "Riskier than all the years you've endured without even proper work papers?" Her daughter's words weighed like truths Dorothy had always tried to ignore. No matter how much she told herself she endured everything for her family's sake, there was a limit to how much a person could take. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Dorothy took the judge's card and dialed the number with trembling fingers. After 3 rings, an automated voicemail answered. She hung up without leaving a message, her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, when she arrived for work, she found the house in chaos. Victoria Blackwell, Richard's wife, was rushing back and forth, barking orders at the other staff while talking on the phone. "Thank God you're here, Dorothy," she exclaimed upon seeing her. "Richard is having an emergency meeting in the office. It seems one of the hotels is being investigated for labor violations. I need you to prepare a full breakfast for him and the lawyers." A shiver ran down Dorothy's spine. Could the judge have already started an investigation? As she prepared breakfast, she heard raised voices coming from the office. Through the slightly open door, she saw Richard gesturing angrily as he spoke to 2 men in suits. "What do you mean, a surprise audit? This is outrageous. My hotels have always complied with every law." "Mr. Blackwell, we received an anonymous complaint about irregular working conditions, especially concerning cleaning and kitchen staff," one of the lawyers explained, flipping through some papers. "Judge Michael Thompson is personally interested in this case." At the mention of the judge's name, Dorothy nearly dropped the tray. So he really had taken action, but she hadn't filed any complaint. Who could have done it? "That damn judge was at my house yesterday," Richard exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "This can't be a coincidence." The other lawyer, older and calmer, raised a placating hand. "Calm down, Richard. Losing your temper won't help now. We need to check if there are actual violations and fix them before the official audit. When is the scheduled date?" "Next week," replied the first attorney. "Very little time to rectify 20 years of violations if the allegations are true." Dorothy Wilson stepped away from the door before she could be seen. Her mind was in turmoil. On one hand, she felt a bitter satisfaction seeing Richard Blackwell worried. On the other, she feared the consequences. If he discovered the judge was investigating because of what he'd witnessed in their home. At noon, while serving lunch, she noticed Richard watching her with a different, calculating look. After the attorneys left, he called her into the office. "Close the door," he ordered. Dorothy obeyed, her legs trembling. "Did you bring the judge's card?" "I forgot again, sir. I'm sorry." Richard stood slowly, circling the desk until he was face to face with her. "I don't think you grasp the seriousness of this, Dorothy. I need that card, and I need to know exactly what you and that judge discussed." "We didn't discuss anything." "Sir, I swear." "Then how do you explain an anonymous complaint against my hotels right after he was here?" His voice was low, threatening. "Do you have any idea how much damage this could cause me?" Dorothy felt the familiar fear crawl up her spine, but this time something else came with it: indignation. "I didn't file any complaint, sir." "No?" He took a step forward, invading her space. "Then why did my attorneys just inform me we need to rectify the status of several employees, including domestic workers?" The mention of domestic workers made Dorothy flinch. Could the judge have launched an investigation based solely on what he'd seen? Before she could answer, the office door opened, and Victoria Blackwell walked in, stopping in surprise at the scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking between them. "None of your concern, Victoria," Richard snapped. "I'm handling something with Dorothy." Victoria, usually submissive to her husband, didn't back down this time. "From the tone of your voice, it sounds more like you're intimidating her," she said, crossing her arms. "What happened?" "That judge who came yesterday opened an investigation into our hotels, right after seeing how this one—" He pointed disdainfully at Dorothy. "Spilled coffee on my documents." Victoria looked at Dorothy, noticing her discomfort. "And you think it's her fault?" she asked incredulously. "Richard, you grabbed her arm in front of the man. What did you expect?" "Now you're defending the maid." His voice rose an octave. "I'm defending common sense," Victoria shot back firmly. "If there are issues with the hotels, it's not Dorothy's fault. And if you keep treating employees the way you treated her yesterday, I'm not surprised they're investigating our businesses." Dorothy watched the argument in shock. In 20 years, she'd never seen Victoria stand up to her husband like this, let alone in her defense. "Dorothy, you may go," Victoria said, opening the door wider. "Please finish preparing lunch." With a nod, Dorothy hurried out, still hearing the echoes of the argument as she walked down the hallway. Something was changing in that house, and she didn't know if it was for better or worse. That afternoon, Dorothy received an unexpected call on her old cell phone, an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously, relieved to be alone in the laundry room. "Mrs. Wilson?" A familiar male voice spoke on the other end. "This is Judge Michael Thompson, the man you met yesterday at Mr. Blackwell's home." Dorothy nearly dropped the phone. How had he gotten her number? "Your Honor," she stammered, unsure what to say. "Forgive me for obtaining your contact unconventionally," he continued as if reading her thoughts. "The fact is, I'm conducting an investigation into Mr. Blackwell's companies. Blackwell, and I believe you might have important information. But I didn't file any complaint," she quickly clarified. "I know," Richard replied calmly. "The initial complaint came from hotel employees, but after what I witnessed yesterday, I believe the problem is much broader." Dorothy nervously glanced at the door, afraid someone might overhear. "I can't talk about this now," she whispered. "I'm at work." "I understand. Could we meet another time? Maybe tomorrow? It's important, Mrs. Wilson." She hesitated. Fear of losing her job battled with the growing desire for justice in her heart. "Tomorrow is my day off," she finally said, "but I have to take care of my sick grandson." "I can come to you if you prefer," the judge offered. "I promise to be brief." After a moment's thought, Dorothy gave him her address, and they set a time. Hanging up, she felt a mix of dread and hope. She was about to cross a line she never imagined crossing. That evening, when she finally got home, she found Jennifer with a worried expression. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, setting her purse on the small kitchen table. "Matthew's inhaler ran out completely," Jennifer replied, showing the empty device. "I had to borrow one from the neighbor for him to use today, but it won't last long." Dorothy sat down, exhausted. The medicine cost nearly half of what she'd saved for the month's bills. "I'll buy it first thing tomorrow," she promised. Then, hesitantly, she added, "The judge is coming here tomorrow." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Here? Why?" "He wants information about Richard and the hotels. It seems there's already an investigation underway." Jennifer sat beside her mother, taking her hands. "Are you going to talk to him?" Dorothy sighed deeply. "I don't know, sweetheart. I'm scared. If Richard finds out—" "Mom, this could be your chance to finally get what you deserve." Jennifer squeezed her hands fervently. "Think about the example you'll set for Matthew, that we should fight for what's right even when it's hard." Her daughter's words struck deep in Dorothy's heart. All her sacrifices over the years had been for them, so they could have a better life. But what example was she setting by accepting mistreatment day after day? "I'll hear what he has to say," she finally decided. "That's all for now." The next morning, Dorothy was nervously tidying the small living room when the doorbell rang. Matthew, who was playing on the rug, ran to answer, but she stopped him. "Let Grandma get it, sweetheart." Opening the door, she was surprised to see Judge Michael dressed casually, without the formal suit from the other day. He smiled kindly. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. Thank you for having me." "Good morning, Judge. Please come in." Michael stepped inside, looking around with interest, but without any judgment of the modest home. His eyes landed on Matthew, who watched the visitor with curiosity. "And who is this young man?" he asked with a smile. "My grandson, Matthew," Dorothy replied, relaxing slightly at the judge's easy manner. "Matthew, say hello to Judge Michael." The boy approached shyly. "Good morning, Judge," he said, extending his little hand. Michael shook it seriously, as if greeting an adult. "Nice to meet you, Matthew. How old are you?" "5," he answered, proudly holding up 5 fingers. Then he coughed, his chest wheezing slightly. "He has asthma," Dorothy explained, gesturing to the sofa for Michael to sit. "It's gotten worse in this cold weather." Michael nodded as he sat. "My niece has it too. I know how tough it can be." Dorothy offered coffee, which the judge accepted. As she poured, she noticed him pulling some papers from his briefcase. "Mrs. Wilson, I'll be direct," he began, once Matthew had gone to his room to play. 3 months ago, we received anonymous complaints about irregular working conditions at Mr. Blackwell's hotels. There were missing records, unpaid overtime, workplace harassment, the list goes on. Dorothy listened carefully, showing no surprise. She knew her boss's methods well. But what truly shocked me was seeing how he treated you that day, Michael continued. It was eye-opening, and it made me think if he acts like that with a long-time employee in front of a visitor, what wouldn't he do when no one's watching? Dorothy lowered her gaze to her coffee cup. Mr. Richard has always been demanding. Demanding. Michael leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson, what I saw was abuse. Plain and simple. He grabbed your arm hard enough to leave marks, yelled at you. I know, she interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I know what he is, I know what he does. But what can I do? I need this job. Michael studied her for a moment before continuing. I understand your situation. And I'm not here to pressure you, but I want you to know there are laws that protect you. What he's doing isn't just morally wrong, it's illegal. Laws? Dorothy gave a sad smile. Judge, with all due respect, laws are for those who can afford good lawyers. People like Richard Blackwell always slip through. Not always, Michael replied with conviction. That's why I'm personally involved in this case. I've seen too many like him get away over the years, but this time I have enough evidence. He showed some of the documents he'd brought, testimonies from former hotel employees, incomplete records, reports of degrading working conditions. What would happen, Dorothy began hesitantly, if I wanted to testify too? Michael's eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. It would be invaluable testimony. How long have you worked for him again? 20 years. And you have a signed contract? Dorothy hesitated. I do this, but only for the past 5 years when inspections tightened. Before that, it was all under the table. Michael took notes. Vacation time? Holiday bonus? Overtime? Vacations are rare. When the family travels, they sometimes give me a few days. I get a holiday bonus, but never the full amount. And over time, she let out a bitter laugh. I've forgotten what an 8-hour workday even feels like. As the conversation continued, Dorothy felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Years of frustration and injustice were pouring out, and for the first time, someone with the power to change things was truly listening. Has he ever physically assaulted you before? Michael asked at one point. Dorothy was silent for a few seconds. Not like the other day in front of you, but he's grabbed my arm, pushed me. She swallowed hard. Once, when I broke an imported vase, he threw the pieces on the floor and made me clean them up on my knees without gloves. I cut up my hands pretty bad. Michael closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the pain of that memory. I'm so sorry you went through that, Mrs. Wilson. No one deserves such treatment. Just then, Matthew returned to the room, coughing harder than before. His little face was red from the effort to breathe. Grandma, he called weakly. Dorothy rushed to him, scooping him into her arms. Where's your inhaler, sweetheart? It's empty, the boy managed between coughs. Michael stood up, concerned. Does he need a doctor? We need to get his medicine, Dorothy replied, trying to stay calm as her grandson struggled to breathe. But the pharmacy is far, and without hesitation, Michael grabbed his car keys. Let's go now, my car's downstairs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. The next few minutes were a blur for Dorothy. In her desperation over her grandson's health, she barely registered that she was in a judge's car, speeding through the streets of New York City to the nearest pharmacy. Michael not only drove them, but insisted on paying for the medication when he saw Dorothy counting the worn bills she'd pulled from her pocket. Back at the apartment, after Matthew used the inhaler and his breathing steadied, Dorothy finally had a chance to thank him properly. You didn't have to pay for that, Judge. I can pay you back when... Michael raised his hand, gently cutting her off. Please don't worry about it. Consider it an advance for your time today, he smiled, tucking his documents back into his briefcase. But if you really want to thank me, think seriously about what we discussed. Before leaving, he handed Dorothy a new business card. This is attorney Sarah Johnson's contact information. She specializes in labor law and has been helping some of the hotel employees. She could advise you too. No obligation, just to understand your rights. After Michael left, Dorothy stood holding the card, lost in thought. The judge's kindness, so different from the treatment she was used to, stirred something deep inside her. When Jennifer came home from work and heard what had happened, especially about Matthew's asthma attack and the judge's help, she was even more convinced. "Mom, this is a sign," she said excitedly, sitting beside her. "You need to talk to that attorney." "What if I lose my job?" Dorothy asked, fear still lingering. "How will we pay for Matthew's medicine?" "We'll figure it out," Jennifer replied firmly. "I can pick up extra shifts at the hospital. The important thing is that you don't keep putting up with mistreatment. You deserve respect, Mom. You've already sacrificed too much for us." Her daughter's words struck Dorothy deeply. For years she had accepted poor treatment as just part of the job, something she had to endure for her family's sake. But seeing the anger in Jennifer's eyes, the judge's genuine concern, even Victoria Blackwell's unexpected defense of her, it all made Dorothy question whether she had normalized something that should never have been acceptable. That night, after Jennifer and Matthew had gone to sleep, Dorothy picked up the phone and dialed the number on the attorney's card. She scheduled a consultation for her next day off. The following week was one of the most tense in the Blackwell household. Richard was in a foul mood, yelling at the staff over the smallest things. Lawyers came and went constantly, and there were closed-door meetings nearly every day. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed oddly attentive to how her husband treated the employees, stepping in several times when he went too far. On Thursday, as Dorothy served breakfast, Victoria called her aside for a private conversation. "Dorothy, I need to ask you something," she said quietly, checking that they were truly alone. "That judge who was here, has he contacted you since?" Dorothy's blood ran cold. Was this a trap? "Why do you ask?" she replied cautiously. Victoria sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "Because things are complicated. Richard is facing a serious investigation. The lawyers say it could cost millions if they prove there's been systematic misconduct in the hotels all these years." She paused, looking Dorothy straight in the eye. "And I can't stop thinking about how he treated you that day, how he's always treated you, really." The sincerity in Victoria's tone surprised Dorothy. "You never seemed to care before," Dorothy said, surprising herself with her own bluntness. Victoria lowered her gaze, looking genuinely ashamed. "I know, and I have no excuses. Maybe it was easier to pretend I didn't see it, that it was normal." She raised her eyes again. "But it's not normal, is it? No one deserves to be treated the way he treats you." Dorothy Wilson didn't know how to respond. In all those years, she'd never imagined having such a conversation with her employer. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked. "I want to help, somehow," Victoria replied with surprising firmness. "Richard doesn't know, but I have a separate account. My money from my parents' inheritance. If you need anything for your grandson, for your daughter." Dorothy took a step back, suspicious. "Are you offering me money not to testify against your husband?" "No," Victoria exclaimed, looking horrified at the suggestion. "I'm offering help because I finally realized I've failed to do what's right all these years. If you want to testify, I understand." The two women stared at each other in silence for a few seconds, decades of an unequal relationship hanging between them. "I made an appointment with a lawyer," Dorothy admitted finally, "just to know my rights." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's fair. More than fair." She then pulled a card from the pocket of her silk robe and handed it to Dorothy. "This is my personal number. If you need anything, even just someone to listen, you can call me any time." Dorothy took the card hesitantly, still not fully understanding her employer's sudden change. The meeting with attorney Sarah Johnson was eye-opening. In her small but organized office, Dorothy discovered she was entitled to far more than she'd imagined. Years of undocumented work, unpaid overtime, unused vacation, night shift differentials, undeposited retirement funds. The list seemed endless. In total, considering just what we can easily prove, we're looking at compensation of over $300,000, Sarah concluded, peering over her colorful glasses. Dorothy nearly fell off her chair. "$300,000? Sarah smiled sympathetically. "Hard to believe, isn't it? But it's what the law guarantees, and that's not even counting damages for the treatment you endured. Dorothy's head spun. That amount would change her life completely. She could buy a decent home, pay for Jennifer's college, ensure Matthew's treatment, but there would be a price. "What if I lose?" she asked, gripping her purse strap tightly. "He has expensive lawyers. He could drag this out for years." "Normally I'd say it's a risk," Sarah answered honestly, "but in this case we have Judge Michael Thompson's direct interest. He has a formidable reputation for not being intimidated by the powerful, and the fact that he personally witnessed an episode of abuse strengthens our case significantly." Dorothy thought for a long moment. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Sarah closed the folder of documents. "But don't take too long. Cases like this have deadlines, and the sooner we act, the better." On the way home, Dorothy felt as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. Justice was within reach, but fear still paralyzed her. What if Richard retaliated? What if he used his influence to ensure she never found work in New York City again? When she arrived home, she found Jennifer and Matthew in the small living room, along with an unexpected visitor, Victoria Blackwell. "Mrs. Blackwell," Dorothy stopped in the doorway, stunned. "What?" Victoria stood quickly, looking almost as uncomfortable as Dorothy. "Forgive me for coming unannounced. Your daughter was kind enough to let me wait for you." Jennifer looked at her mother with an expression mixing surprise and curiosity. Matthew, oblivious to the tension, kept drawing on the living room floor. "May I speak with you in private?" asked Victoria, clutching her designer bag tightly against her body, clearly out of place in the modest surroundings. Dorothy led Victoria to the small room she shared with her grandson, the only place where they could have some privacy. The contrast between Victoria's elegance and the simplicity of the room couldn't have been starker. "The house is small, but it's clean," Dorothy said defensively. "I didn't come to judge your home," Victoria replied, seeming genuinely dismayed by the misunderstanding. "I came because I found out something you need to know." She opened her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "I found this in Richard's office. It's instructions for the lawyers on how to proceed if you file a lawsuit against him." Dorothy took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why are you showing me this?" Victoria sat on the edge of the simple bed, suddenly looking very tired. "Because I'm tired, Dorothy. Tired of pretending I don't see the injustices happening right in front of me. For years, I've turned a blind eye to how Richard treats people, how he built our fortune by exploiting others' labor." She looked directly into Dorothy's eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your trust, but I want to do what's right at least this once." Inside the envelope, Dorothy found documents detailing a strategy to discredit her if she took legal action. Private investigators, digging into her past, plans to pressure former co-workers to testify against her, even suggestions for transferring assets to avoid payments. "He's prepared to destroy me," Dorothy murmured, feeling a lump in her throat. "He was," Victoria corrected. "These plans won't work anymore." "Why?" "Because I've already spoken to the lawyers and made it clear I don't support these tactics. If Richard insists, I'll testify in your favor," Victoria declared with surprising firmness. "He may have built the empire, but half of it is legally mine. And I won't let my name and my money be used to perpetuate injustice." Dorothy looked at Victoria as if seeing her for the first time. In 20 years, she'd never imagined the elegant, seemingly fragile employer could show such strength. "Why now?" she asked, still incredulous. "After all these years," Victoria sighed deeply. "Maybe I needed to see through a stranger's eyes to finally recognize what's always been in front of me." When that judge looked at Richard with such contempt, something snapped inside me. She paused, choosing her words. Or maybe I was just waiting for an excuse to do what I always knew was right. That night, after Victoria left, Dorothy told Jennifer everything. The consultation with the attorney, Victoria's visit, the revealing documents. Together they weighed the pros and cons of moving forward with the lawsuit. "I don't know if I have the courage," Dorothy admitted, her hands still shaking at the thought of facing Richard Blackwell in court. "Mom," Jennifer held her hands firmly, "you raised a daughter alone, working in conditions most people couldn't handle for a day. You're the bravest person I know." Matthew, who was playing on the rug, looked up at his mother's raised voice. "Grandma's brave," he declared with the simplicity of children, making them both smile. In the early hours of the morning, after hours of reflection, Dorothy made her decision. With fingers still unsteady but a determined heart, she sent a message to Sarah Johnson. "I want to move forward with the lawsuit. I'm tired of being afraid." The following days brought drastic changes. Following the attorney's advice, Dorothy continued working normally, discreetly documenting every irregularity, every unpaid overtime hour, every instance of harassment. Victoria, now an unlikely ally, began intervening more actively when Richard overstepped, creating an atmosphere of constant tension in the house. Richard, in turn, seemed increasingly nervous about the investigation into his hotels. One particularly tense afternoon, he called Dorothy into his office. "I need you to be honest with me," he said, trying to maintain a cordial tone that sounded forced. "Has that judge contacted you since that day?" Dorothy, who had been advised by Sarah not to lie directly, but also not to reveal more than necessary, answered carefully, "He gave me his card, sir, as you saw." "Yes, I know that," Richard insisted, drumming his fingers on the desk. "But after, did he visit you?" Before Dorothy could respond, the office door opened and Victoria walked in without knocking. "Richard, we need to talk about the dinner for—" She stopped when she saw Dorothy. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were busy." "I'm in the middle of something important," he replied curtly. Victoria, instead of leaving as she normally would, crossed her arms and stayed where she was. "Dorothy, could you give us a moment?" she asked, but her tone made it clear it wasn't a request. Relieved by the interruption, Dorothy quickly left. As she closed the door, she heard Victoria say in a low but firm voice, "If you're intimidating employees, Richard, it will only make our situation worse." That evening, when she returned home, Dorothy found a white envelope someone had slipped under her door. Inside was a blank check signed by Richard Blackwell and a note, "Name your price, forget this whole story." Dorothy's stomach turned. This was his tactic, trying to buy her off, as if her dignity had a price. With trembling hands, she photographed the check and the note, sending the images to Sarah Johnson, as she had been instructed to do if she received any kind of offer or threat. The lawyer's response came quickly. "This is attempted bribery and can be used in our favor. Don't respond, don't cash the check, keep it as evidence." The next morning, when she arrived for work, Dorothy immediately sensed something had changed. Victoria greeted her at the door, looking agitated. "Richard left early for an emergency meeting with the lawyers," she said quietly. "Something about a collective settlement with the hotel staff. He was furious." Dorothy nodded, trying to keep a neutral expression as she headed to the kitchen to start her tasks, but Victoria followed her. "He offered you money, didn't he?" she asked bluntly when they were alone. Surprised by the directness, Dorothy hesitated before answering. "How do you know?" "Because I overheard him on the phone with the lawyer, saying he'd resolve it the quickest way," Victoria replied with a grave expression. "Dorothy, whatever you decide, I want you to know I'll support your choice, but please be careful. Richard, when cornered, doesn't act rationally." That warning echoed in Dorothy's mind all day. That afternoon, while answering the house phone, she received a call that chilled her. "Mrs. Wilson," it was Matthew's teacher. "There was an incident at school. Man tried to pick up your grandson, claiming he was a family friend sent by you." "What?" Dorothy's heart raced. "I didn't send anyone. Is Matthew okay?" "Yes, we followed protocol and didn't release him since the name wasn't on the authorized list. The man left when we mentioned calling the police." As soon as she hung up, Dorothy tried to reach Jennifer at the hospital, but couldn't. With shaking hands, she dialed the only number that came to mind at that moment, Judge Michael Thompson's. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Wilson, has something happened?" With a voice trembling with fear, she recounted the incident. Michael listened intently. "Where is your grandson now?" "Still at school. My daughter is at work and I can't reach her. I'll send a court officer to pick up the boy and take him somewhere safe until you finish work." "Don't worry, he'll be protected," Michael assured firmly, "and I'll document this incident. If it's an attempt at intimidation related to the case, that's extremely serious." When Victoria found Dorothy crying in the service area half an hour later, few words were needed to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Go home now," she ordered, handing her a few $100 bills. "Take a cab, pick up your grandson, and don't come back until you feel safe. I'll tell Richard you had a family emergency." "You think he—" Dorothy couldn't finish the question, the fear nearly palpable in her voice. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. "I don't know what he's capable of these days, but we can't take any chances." She grabbed her car keys from her purse. "Actually, I'll drive you myself. It'll be faster." The gesture stunned Dorothy deeply. In 20 years, Victoria Blackwell had never driven her anywhere. Her employer had always seemed to live in a world entirely separate from hers. In the luxurious car, as they drove to Matthew's school, the silence between the two women was heavy with unspoken meaning. Finally, Victoria spoke. "You know, I've always envied you in a way." "Envied me?" Dorothy couldn't hide her disbelief. "Your strength, your dignity, even in the worst circumstances." Victoria kept her eyes fixed on the road. "Me, with all my money and privilege, I've never had the courage to stand up to Richard the way you are now." Dorothy didn't know how to respond. It was surreal to hear this from the woman she'd always seen as part of an unreachable world. When they arrived at the school, they found Matthew safe in the company of a court officer, sent by Michael. The woman explained she had already spoken to Jennifer at the hospital and arranged a police escort for her as well, as a precaution. "Grandma!" Matthew ran into Dorothy's arms as soon as he saw her. "A man tried to take me, but the lady wouldn't let him." Holding her grandson tightly, Dorothy exchanged meaningful glances with the officer and Victoria. All three women understood the gravity of what could have happened. "Let's go home, sweetheart," she said, trying to keep her voice steady so as not to frighten the boy further. "I don't think it's safe for you to be alone in the apartment tonight," Victoria interjected. "Why don't you come to my country house? Richard never goes there, and you can stay until we sort this out." The court officer nodded in approval. "That would be wise, Mrs. Wilson, at least until we assess what happened today." And so, in a twist Dorothy could never have imagined, she found herself driving with Victoria Blackwell, her employer of 20 years, to a country house on the outskirts of New York City. Matthew, in the back seat, was excited about the adventure, oblivious to the adult's tension. Meanwhile, in the Blackwell penthouse, Richard returned from the meeting with the lawyers, furious at the settlement proposal presented by Judge Thompson. Full regularization of all employees, substantial compensation payments, and a hefty fine for the company. "Where is everyone?" he shouted upon finding the house silent, with no sign of Victoria or Dorothy. The only response came from the gardener tending to the plants on the terrace. Mrs. Blackwell left with Dorothy a few hours. "Oh, it seemed urgent." A chill of concern ran down Richard's spine. Victoria and Dorothy together. That couldn't be good. He tried calling his wife's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. With growing paranoia, he searched the office for clues about where they might have gone or what they could be plotting. That's when he found, hidden in a drawer that belonged to Victoria, something that made his blood run cold. A complete dossier on the years of abuse against Dorothy, including dates, specific incidents, and witnesses. Victoria had been documenting everything, perhaps for years. The betrayal by his own wife hit him like a punch to the gut. Meanwhile, miles away, in the peaceful countryside house surrounded by trees, Dorothy watched Matthew run through the garden, free and happy as she had never seen him before. Jennifer had joined them after work, escorted by a security guard arranged by Victoria. "I never imagined I'd one day be staying at your boss's house," Jennifer remarked, sitting beside her, mother on the porch. "I never imagined she'd become an ally," Dorothy replied, watching Victoria in the distance speaking on the phone with what seemed to be her personal attorney. "People can surprise us," Jennifer mused, hugging her mother by the shoulders. "Sometimes it takes something extreme to reveal who they really are." That night, as Matthew and Jennifer slept, Dorothy and Victoria talked at length on the porch under the stars. Years of social and emotional distance gradually dissolving into a new mutual understanding. "Why did you never say anything?" Dorothy finally asked, referring to the years of mistreatment she had endured. Victoria contemplated her glass of wine before answering. Because I lived in the same prison as you, just a gilded one. Questioning him would mean facing truths about my own marriage, my own life, that I wasn't ready to confront. She sighed, deeply. But now I can't pretend not to see anymore. Victoria's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was her personal attorney with disturbing news. Richard had discovered the hideout at the country house and was on his way, furious. "He can't come in here," Victoria assured after hanging up, though her voice trembled slightly. "I've activated the security system and alerted the guards. We're protected." Even so, Dorothy felt the familiar fear return. Richard Blackwell wasn't a man to give up easily when he wanted something, and now he wanted to silence her at any cost. The night grew tense, with Victoria and Dorothy taking turns keeping watch. Just before dawn, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Victoria checked the security cameras. "It's him," she confirmed, her voice tight, "and he's alone." Dorothy's heart raced. "What do we do?" "Nothing," Victoria replied with surprising calm. "He can't come in without my permission, and I won't give it." The next few minutes were filled with rising tension. Richard rang the doorbell insistently, then began pounding on the door, shouting Victoria's name. When he saw he wouldn't be let in, he started circling the property, looking for another way inside. That's when Victoria did something that completely stunned Dorothy. She called the police. "I'm being threatened by my husband, who's trying to break into my property," she said clearly to the dispatcher. "I have a child and 2 women under my protection, and we fear for our safety." When she hung up, she noticed Dorothy's astonished look. "What?" she asked. "You called the police against your own husband?" Victoria gave a sad smile. "It's long past time to do what's right, don't you think?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. As the first light of morning began to appear on the horizon, 2 police cars arrived at the property. Richard, upon seeing the police, initially tried to use his prestige to intimidate them, but it was in vain. With a temporary restraining order issued over the phone by an on-duty judge, which Dorothy suspected was Michael, though no one confirmed it, Richard was forced to leave the property. "So this isn't over," he shouted to Victoria as he was escorted to his car. "You'll regret choosing her side." "The only regret I have is not doing this sooner," Victoria replied, with a dignity that even impressed the officers. In the weeks that followed, the case escalated beyond anything Dorothy had imagined. Judge Michael, determined to make an example of it, fast-tracked the proceedings. Other employees and former employees of the hotels began coming forward, sharing similar stories of abuse and misconduct. Victoria, in a move that shocked New York City's high society, filed for divorce, citing years of psychological abuse. Cornered on all sides, Richard made one last desperate play. He offered Dorothy a multi-million-dollar settlement to drop the case out of court. The offer came through his lawyers during a tense meeting in Sarah Johnson's office. $5 million, announced the lead attorney, sliding a document across the table. "No admission of guilt, no publicity. Everyone signs confidentiality agreements and we all move on." Dorothy looked at the number on the paper and felt momentarily dizzy. It was more money than she could earn in several lifetimes. "What's the catch?" asked Sarah, ever vigilant. "Withdrawal of all charges, both labor and harassment claims, plus a signed statement, declaring it was all just a misunderstanding," the lawyer replied. Sarah glanced at Dorothy, leaving the decision in her hands. For a moment, the temptation was nearly overwhelming. With that money, she could secure Matthew's future, pay for Jennifer's college, buy a comfortable home. But something inside her rebelled. "No," she finally said, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. "This was never about money." "Think carefully, Mrs. Wilson," the lawyer pressed. "Court cases can drag on for years. With this settlement, you could resolve everything today." "I've already thought," she replied, standing up. "For 20 years I've imagined what it would be like to have my dignity back, and I've learned it doesn't have a price." Leaving that meeting, Dorothy felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in decades, she wasn't afraid of the future. The case finally went to Trial on a rainy winter morning. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, onlookers, former hotel employees, all eager to witness the showdown between the housekeeper and the powerful businessman. Dorothy entered the courtroom, accompanied by Jennifer and her lawyer. To her surprise, Victoria was there too, seated on the plaintiff's side, not the defense. Richard, meanwhile, looked like a shadow of the imposing man he once was. Worn down and aged by months of legal pressure and public scrutiny, he barely lifted his eyes when she walked in. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses testified, documents were examined, arguments were made. Victoria stunned everyone with her damning testimony, detailing years of abuse she had witnessed. "Why did you never intervene?" Richard's lawyer asked during cross-examination, trying to discredit her. "Because I was afraid," Victoria answered with unsettling honesty, "and because, like many privileged people, it was easier to look the other way. My silence makes me complicit, and that's why I'm here today, to do what I should have done long ago." When it was Dorothy's turn to testify, she feared her legs might give out beneath her. But as she stepped up to the podium and saw Matthew and Jennifer in the audience, she found the strength she needed. In a clear, firm voice, she recounted 20 years of humiliation, abuse, and denied rights. "I'm not here for revenge," she concluded, looking directly into Richard's weary eyes. "I'm here because no one should go through what I did. No one should have to choose between dignity and survival." On the 3rd day, the verdict was announced. The judge, not Michael, who had recused himself to avoid claims of bias, but a seasoned female judge known for her strictness, delivered the decision. This court recognizes the severe labor and moral violations committed by the defendant against the plaintiff over 2 decades. The ruling orders payment of all back wages, as detailed in the records, plus compensation for moral damages in the amount of $2 million. A murmur spread through the courtroom. It was one of the largest moral damages awards ever granted to a domestic worker in the country. Furthermore, the judge continued, "I order the defendant's businesses to undergo a full labor audit and implement, under judicial supervision, a human rights training program for all managers." When the session ended, Dorothy was embraced by Jennifer, by Sarah, and to her surprise by Victoria. Richard, on the other hand, left escorted by his lawyers, ignoring the reporters swarming for a statement. "It's over," Jennifer whispered in her mother's ear, tears in her eyes. "It's finally over." But for Dorothy, it wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. In the months that followed, as the judgment execution process ran its legal course, Dorothy and her family underwent profound changes. With support from Victoria, who had become an unlikely friend, Dorothy bought a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood where Matthew could play outside, without the respiratory issues that had plagued him in their old apartment. Jennifer, encouraged by her mother, finally pursued her dream of studying medicine. The case gained national attention, turning Dorothy into a symbol for domestic workers across the country. Invitations for interviews and speaking engagements poured in, but she only accepted those that allowed her to promote the bigger cause, the dignity of domestic labor. "I never imagined my story could inspire others," she remarked one afternoon, sipping coffee with Victoria on the porch of her new home. "You underestimate your own power," replied Victoria, who had reinvented herself after the divorce, dedicating herself to social projects. "Your courage changed not just your life, but so many others." Indeed, in the wake of the case, reports of abuse against domestic workers surged. New laws were proposed, and even Judge Michael became an even more vocal advocate for labor rights. As for Richard, the news wasn't encouraging. After losing control of several hotels to Victoria in the divorce and facing similar lawsuits from other employees, his fortune and reputation lay in ruins. Ironically, it was one of his former managers, Brian Miller, who took over the hotel chain, implementing all the court-ordered changes and turning the company into a model of fair labor practices. On a sunny Sunday, nearly a year after the verdict, Dorothy received an unexpected visitor. Richard himself, now visibly aged and stripped of his former arrogance, asked to speak. "May I come in?" he asked hesitantly at the door. Dorothy paused, but something in his gaze, no longer intimidating, just deeply weary, made her relent. 5 minutes, she conceded, holding the door open and calling Jennifer to join them. I didn't come to cause trouble, he assured, sitting uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. I came because I need to say a few things. What followed surprised both Dorothy and Jennifer. Richard, the man who for decades had seemed incapable of admitting any wrongdoing, did something neither of them ever expected. He apologized. I don't expect you to accept it, he said, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve it, but I spent months in therapy, trying to understand how I became the man I was, the monster I was, and I realized I could never move forward without at least trying. He couldn't finish the sentence, unexpected tears welling in his eyes. Dorothy and Jennifer exchanged bewildered glances. The man before them seemed like a mere shell of the powerful Richard Blackwell they had known. What happened to the hotels? Dorothy asked, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. Lost most of them in the divorce and lawsuits, he replied, running a hand over his weary face. What was left I sold. I'm starting over with a small inn upstate. Just me and 2 employees, treated with all the respect I never gave you. The silence that followed was heavy with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Dorothy felt undeniable satisfaction seeing justice had been served. On the other, there was a flicker of compassion for the broken figure before her. I can't say I forgive you, she finally said honestly. Not yet. But I appreciate you coming, for acknowledging. Richard nodded, rising to leave. Just one more thing, he said, pausing, at the door. Victoria was right all those years about you, about how I treated people. If I'd listened to her. He let the words hang, knowing it was too late for what-ifs. After he left, Dorothy sat on the porch, watching Matthew play carefree with his new dog in the garden. That visit had closed a chapter, in a way, not with full forgiveness. Some wounds ran too deep for that, but with a mutual recognition of humanity. Are you okay? Jennifer asked, sitting beside her with 2 cups of coffee. I am, Dorothy answered, surprising herself with the truth in that simple word. For the first time in a long time, I'm really okay. That night, as Matthew slept soundly in his new room, Dorothy reflected on the incredible journey she'd taken. From humiliated housekeeper to a symbol of resilience and inspiration. From a frightened woman to someone who had finally found her voice. A text message interrupted her thoughts. It was Victoria. I heard Richard came to see you today. Are you okay? The genuine concern still surprised Dorothy. How could 2 women who'd lived so long on opposite sides of the same house now share a true friendship? I'm okay, she replied. Actually, better than I expected. He's changing, Victoria wrote. Slowly, but he is. Maybe it's too late for us, but it's never too late to become a better person. Those words stayed with Dorothy as she drifted to sleep. Never too late to become a better person, even for someone like Richard, even after decades of mistakes. And if there was hope for him, there was hope for anyone. 2 weeks later, Dorothy received an invitation that would change her life once again. Judge Michael, now promoted to a higher court, asked her to share her story at an event about domestic labor rights. I don't know if I can speak in public, she confessed to Jennifer, anxious. I've never done anything like this. Mom, you faced Richard Blackwell in a courtroom full of expensive lawyers. You can do anything, Jennifer replied with conviction. On the day of the event, Dorothy was nervous but determined. Wearing a simple yet elegant outfit, a gift from Victoria, she took the stage to tell her story. To her surprise, the words flowed naturally, touching the hearts of everyone present. What I've learned, she concluded, looking at the attentive audience, is that our dignity is priceless. When I realized that, I found a strength I didn't even know I had. The applause was deafening. After the event, several journalists surrounded her, wanting more details. Among them, a reporter from a major network asked an unexpected question. Mrs. Dorothy, after everything you've been through, what would you say to other domestic workers who suffer similar abuses but are afraid to speak up? Dorothy thought. For a moment, then replied simply, I'd say fear is natural, but it can't be bigger than self-respect. I'd say everyone needs to find their own courage, in their own time. And most importantly, I'd say no one is alone in this fight. That answer, broadcast nationwide, resonated with thousands of workers in similar situations. In the following days, the phones at legal aid centers wouldn't stop ringing, with people seeking information about their rights. Judge Michael, watching the interview from his office, smiled with satisfaction. When he had decided to give his card to the humiliated housekeeper that day at the Blackwell's penthouse, he never imagined the ripple effect that simple gesture would create. A month later, Dorothy received another surprising invitation. A non-governmental organization dedicated to domestic workers' rights offered her a job as coordinator of a new awareness program. "I'm not qualified for this," she protested, unsure. "You have something far more valuable, lived experience and moral credibility," replied the NGO's director. "We can provide all the technical training you'll need." After talking with Jennifer and Victoria, Dorothy accepted the challenge. At 58, she was about to start a completely new career, doing something she never imagined possible, turning her pain into purpose. On her first day at the new job, as she entered the NGO's modest headquarters, Dorothy was met with a surprise. Several former employees of the Blackwell hotels, people who had benefited from the class action lawsuit, were there to welcome her. "You paved the way for all of us," said one of the cooks, hugging her tearfully. "We wanted to thank you in person." That moment crystallized for Dorothy the true meaning of everything she had endured. Her personal struggle had become something much bigger than herself. That night, as she told Matthew a bedtime story, the boy asked an unexpected question. "Grandma, my teacher said you're a hero. Is that true?" Dorothy smiled, stroking her grandson's hair. "No, sweetheart, just an ordinary person who decided she'd had enough." "That sounds like a hero to me," the boy insisted with the simple logic of children. Maybe, Dorothy thought as she turned off the bedroom light, true heroism was exactly that. Ordinary people deciding they'd had enough. Ordinary people who, despite their fear, take a step forward. Ordinary people who refuse to accept that their dignity has a price. And if that was being a hero, then perhaps, just perhaps, her grandson was right. 2 years had passed since the historic trial. Dorothy's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. Her work at the NGO had already helped hundreds of domestic workers learn about and fight for their rights. Jennifer was in her 3rd year of medical school, determined to specialize in pediatric pulmonology, inspired by Matthew's condition, which, with proper treatment, now rarely flared up. On a sunny afternoon, Dorothy received a special visit at her home. Victoria and Michael, who had grown closer through the social work they both now pursued. "We have some news to share," announced Victoria after the initial greetings. "The Blackwell Wilson Foundation was officially registered today." Dorothy widened her eyes upon hearing her last name alongside Victoria's. "Foundation what?" "Blackwell Wilson," repeated Judge Michael Thompson with a smile. "An organization dedicated to promoting labor rights and free legal assistance for domestic workers across the United States. And we want you to be the executive director," Victoria added, handing her an envelope with the formal proposal. Dorothy sat down, stunned by the magnitude of the offer. "But I don't have an academic background or any experience managing—" "What you do have, Judge," Thompson gently interrupted, "is something no degree can give: moral authority and practical knowledge. The rest you'll learn, just as you've already proven you can." That night, after long conversations with Jennifer and with herself, Dorothy made her decision. She would accept the challenge. Her journey, which had begun with a spilled cup of coffee and an observant judge, now led her to head a foundation that could change the lives of thousands. And as she prepared herself a cup of coffee before bed, a small ritual she never abandoned, despite the changes in her life, Dorothy reflected on the twists of fate. How a moment of humiliation, witnessed by the right person, had sparked a revolution not just in her own life, but in the lives of so many others. Perhaps it was true what they said. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see our situation clearly before we can finally see it ourselves. It took the indignant gaze of a judge for Dorothy to recognize what she had always known deep down, that she deserved more, that she deserved better. And now that certainty was what she passed on to every domestic worker who sought help at the EO's Foundation. You deserve more. You deserve better. Together they were changing, one case at a time, the deeply rooted culture of exploitation in society. In her new office at the Foundation, Dorothy kept a simple phrase framed on the wall, attributed to a former domestic worker who had fought for labor rights decades earlier. They say we're part of the family, but families don't have members without rights. Those words had become her mantra, her mission, her renewed purpose. And when she looked at Matthew growing strong and confident, at Jennifer pursuing her dream of becoming a doctor, she knew every tear, every moment of fear, every uncertain step had been worth it. Because some prices are too high to pay, like the price of dignity, and some rewards are too precious to measure, like the pride in a grandson's eyes when he sees his grandmother not as a victim, but as a hero. End of story. Dear listener, your opinion is a treasure to us. What did you think of Dorothy's journey? Would you have acted like her or like Victoria? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.